All right, so welcome everyone. This is the StatPREP workshop on writing an interactive tutorial. This is December 1st of 2017. I am Catherine Kozak. I'm one of the co-PIs on the StatPREP grant, and Danny Kaplan will be doing our presentation. So Danny?
Thanks. I'm going to share my screen and go to the, let's see if I can do it, desktop. Good, share screen. Go to the StatPREP site just to get us oriented. You can see this screen, I'm hoping.
Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's what I just need is a quick yes, so I know I'm still connected to the world. So today's webinar is about writing an interactive tutorial. And this is the third in a short little series of webinars about using RStudio. And that's a little bit atypical, I think, of what's going on in StatPREP. Our intention is not that people have to learn to use RStudio. I'm going to show you the computational platform that we're providing. But so many people during the workshops asked how to create the kinds of tutorials that we were demonstrating at the workshop that we thought the first few webinars might be about that topic. So in fact, there's lots of other ways that we expect people to, sorry, let me just try to interact with StatPREP. And here's a page with some lesson ideas on it, the ones we've developed so far. And in the next 2 months, we're going to be able to instrument these lessons so that you can record and find out, if your students are using them, you can record and find out how they participated, whether they used them, which questions they answered, and so that we can find out what are the typical mistakes that people make, and that helps us to refine them. And here's an example of such a document, a tutorial. This is one from that site before, Polls and Prediction. And as you see, there's a kind of narrative, and this is 3 sections into the narrative, and you're seeing this could be a textbook, right? This is static input, and there's computer commands, and I think for many people this would be too much computer commands. But the thing that we like about this platform is that you can have students do the computations without having to set up anything other than a web browser. So they just need to get to a program like this. So for example, this is a question about survey size. And you can ask the students to change the size of the survey that's described in the lesson, and then get the result, who won the election in this case, and look to see what's the smallest survey size that gives you a pretty consistent, correct prediction of how the election actually turned out from the data. So this is the kind of thing you can do with a computational platform that's interactive. Students don't necessarily have to understand that statement, but they do have to, most students could understand how to change the size from 20 to 100 to 250. So that's an example of a tutorial. All right, and just one more check. You can have many of these chunks, these code blocks in the tutorial. So I thought we'd start by writing one from scratch. Okay, is anyone up to that?
Yes.
Joe, that's good. Joe's my star student. Okay, as long as Joe's going to be there. All right, so I'm now displaying the StatPREP RStudio server. And I think I've seen many of you before at these webinars, so I think that many of you already have an account on that server. If you don't have an account, then we have some guest accounts that you could log into now. And you can text Kate, and she'll be able to give you the name of a guest account and the login ID for the guest account. Right now, I'm logged in. It's hidden by the by the webinar. I'm logged in as guest 115 right now. And so I'm going to start from scratch writing a tutorial document, a lesson. All right. What's the first thing you should do when you start writing a lesson? You might have to unmute yourself, people other than Joe.
Yeah, you all could be kind of unmuted right now because I think we've got not a ton of people here today. So I think we can all be unmuted today if you want to.
Yeah, I'm going to pretend to be a teacher instead of just a talker. What's the first thing you do?
Well, Danny, I would probably make some sort of outline.
Joe, you're always raising your hand.
First.
Say again?
I would save the file first.
Save file. There's no file yet. Let's make an outline. All right, and we're going to start doing that in RStudio. So before I was showing you, of course, a tutorial and how they're formatted, but now we're working with the tool that's used to build these tutorials with RStudio. And I want to emphasize to people who are coming to this webinar for the first time that this is not the expectation of StatPREP. This is one of the tools we're using to build StatPREP, but many people were interested in these tools, and that's why we decided to talk about them to start out. And so this is RStudio, and because it's running in a browser, it's important to remember that the menu, when we talk about menu items, the menu is the thing next to the big blue R. Okay? So we're going to start by creating a lesson. And we've done this before. We're going to create a new project to organize our lesson. So I went up to the project menu in the upper right, and now I'm going to new directory, and I'm going to start a new project, and the directory name is going to be called Lesson 1, and I'll just create it right there. So now you can see, I hope you can see in the right corner, it says we're in project lesson 1. Nothing is part of that project yet, but this will help us to keep it organized. And then you may have created a new project or not, but then we're going to create a new file. And what kind of a file? We're going to write an outline, as Joe suggested. We're going to create an R Markdown file. And we're just going to start with that. So I'm pressing File next to the blue ball, New File, R Markdown. I'm going to give it a title. I'll call it Lesson for December 1. And I'm just going to let this be a document. And right now, I'm going to leave the output format as HTML. And I can't. And so when I've done that, now I have a new tab called Untitled right now, open in the editing pane. And then there's these other panes, of course, with files and environment and console and such. But I'm editing, and it looks like this. And if you're editing one, it may look very much the same. So first, let me see, do people understand how I got here? And if you're trying to do this simultaneously, have you been able to get here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So right now, I haven't put anything into this document except the title, perhaps. I'm going to save it. All right. And I'm going to save it under Lesson 1, and I'm going to call this December 1, December 1st, whatever. There we go. This is December 1st. That's going to be our lesson for December 1. All right. Now, I'm just showing you workflow here. There's been no statistics or creativity or anything like that. It's very important when you write a document to start with something that works, and then when you make a change, test that it still works. That's a really powerful way to keep on the rather narrow track of such complex technology. And when I say, does it work, I'm going to press this knit button. And when I do that, then I have the document show up, the knitted document show up in the Viewer tab. You can see the title and the date. And then there was already, it seems, some text in this, a section header, R Markdown, and then some text after it. This is the dummy or the template document that RStudio provides, just so that you always start out with something that works. Okay, so I don't want this text. You may find it useful to look at it as you're learning about R and Markdown, just to see what the structure looks like. But I'm going to erase all this stuff, and we're going to make a lesson. All right? So it's just an outline. So I'll start with a section, Introduction. And I've already got a plan for this lesson. So we're going to use some data that were mentioned in the GAZE report. Refers to data on Scottish hill racing. Like, I don't know why it's capitalized. Jessica Utz, I think, who was president of the ASA, was the statistician who brought these data into the report. And if you read the GAZE report or read it again, you'll see that there's a nice example of talking about confounding and such involving the Scottish hill racing data. So this lesson is going to be about that, just in a very little way. But that's the start of my lesson. I'll put in a new line. And look, I'm just going to knit it again so that I know that it's still working. So if I had broken something, I would have found that out, and I could go back, try to figure out what I did that broke it. All right. Up to this point, we've reviewed basically through this last month's webinar, which was writing an RMD document, using RStudio and writing an RMD document. Now we're going to start for the first time using R commands. So let's look at this RMD document so you understand the anatomy of it. And then you'll be able to take RMD documents and modify them to your own ends. So at the top of this document is a little section that's offset by lines with 3 horizontal dashes. That section just contains information, if you want metadata, about the document. So the title and such. You don't need to edit that, but if you did want to edit something like the title or the date, feel free. Just try to keep things that are in quotes, try to keep them in quotes. Right? And here, introduction, this is a header written in the Markdown syntax, and then I've started a paragraph, GAZE reports to data on Scottish hill racing. Where does R fit into this? R connects to knitr documents most often in these things, these little blocks, which are called chunks. And a chunk is always delimited by 3 backticks and then closed by 3 backticks. And in the first line, there's always going to be a curly brace and an R, and maybe a closed curly brace, and that's it. This one has 2 additional components. One is the word setup, which is just the name for the chunk, a label we can refer to the chunk. And then here's a directive that says, I don't want to see this chunk in the published document, just because it's too technical stuff. So any R code you need to put in, you would put in here. So almost always, when you're using R, you're using a library, one or more libraries. One of the libraries we're going to use today is called LearnR. Oops, I've got to give the right command. That's what's going to let us have the interactive tutorials. We're not going to use that yet. And another library we're going to use is called MDSint, which happens to be the place that has the Scottish hill racing data. but that's, and then that's going to set things up for the rest of the document. Made a change, going to knit it up. All right. Okay, good. So you see there was a problem already. It's a good thing that I compiled it now. I would have gotten this problem later on. And you can read the error. It says package or namespace. What does that mean? Failed for learner. Well, that's a good hint that right now, this is what's messing me up. And we can talk about why in a little bit. So I'm just going to comment that out right now. I jumped ahead of myself. And thinking I fixed the problem, I will try knitting it. And there we go. Okay, so it's still working. So back to the outline. The data that I'm going to use, the data table, which is called hill runners, contains winning times in the male and female divisions in a large number of races run in Scotland. So just narrative. And as you're outlining, it doesn't have to be refined. You might just want to make notes about what you're thinking of doing. And now at this point, I'll put in another chunk. So this is what a basic chunk looks like. And I want to show you what the hill runners data looks like. So what have I done? I've added some text. I added a chunk, time to knit. My screen is too small. I apologize for that, but let me make it nicer. So when I create this chunk and I knit the document, the command gets executed, and the result of the calculation, which is the first 6 rows in the table hill runners, that gets displayed. Right? So these are the data that we're going to be using. Probably the variables are pretty straightforward. Year, sex, M or W, the name of the winner, the time, that's going to be in seconds. So this is half an hour roughly, and then the name of the race. Right? So it's December 1st. Let's say it's the first day of our winter term. What kind of question would you like to ask students about this data? You've exposed them to a new set of data. What kind of things do you ask them to think about from the get-go?
Danny, I was asked a question, how do you resize the plot? It's too big.
The plot?
Yes.
Which plot?
I don't know.
So the person with the question, if you'd unmute yourself, then. Not coming up?
No.
Okay, well, ping Kate again. But this is, there we go.
This is me. There was a plot at the beginning, and the plot was so big. Yeah, well, I guess you.
Oh, I see. When you ran the
original one, the dummy
the original one, there was a plot in it. Yes.
Yeah.
And where did the document show up when you compiled it? Did it show up in the viewer tab, or did it show up in another window?
In another window.
Okay. So our studio will do that depending on how you set it up. And that can be convenient, but it can also be kind of a pain. So let me show you now how to set it up so that when you compile the document, it shows up in this viewer tab. I find that's much more convenient. If you turn out not to like it as much, then you can always switch back. So I'm going to go to Tools and Global Options. and R Markdown. So this is many, many different kinds of options for RStudio. And then one of the options is show output preview in, and mine is set to viewer pane, and yours was probably set to window. So change yours to viewer pane, and then try again and let me know if that does the job.
Okay. So options.
Sorry, my screen is too big here. There we go. Okay, did that seem to work?
Yeah.
Great. All right, well, the rest of you have had a chance to think about what questions you want to ask your students about a new data set. You know, when they run into some data, what are the things you want them to know about it first?
So I would think that we'd want to know maybe who ran the fastest.
Okay, so you want to calculate something from the data.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. We can do that. I'm going to make a note of that. Who ran the fastest? But before they calculate something from the data, what do they have to know about the data table itself?
What are the variables?
What are the variables?
What kind of variables are there?
Yeah, what are the variables? Any other kinds of questions?
What type of variables do we have?
Okay, and that's, what type? We might want to ask, what is a case? Right, there are various questions that you always ask about a data, and it's to us it's so obvious that you ask these that sometimes we don't think about it. But I'm going to start with that. All right, and so you can see the variables over here, and just from that little bit of content, you get a sense for what they are. So we want them. Let's say we want to ask them a question about the variables. So what are the variables? So tell me, what are the variables? You're all very shy. Don't be shy. It's December. Soon it's going to be 2018.
So I'd say one of them is year.
Sex, name, time, race.
Time.
What was that? Go ahead. Say it again.
Year, sex, name, time, race.
Okay.
Time, race.
Yes, good. Okay, so what kind of question could we ask the students to get them to think about what the variables are, or what kind of variables they are?
What kind?
I mean, like, are they quantitative? Are they qualitative?
Okay, so let's look at that one. Year, quantitative or qualitative, categorical, however you want to use the term.
Yep.
Which is it?
I'd say it's quantitative.
Yeah, I don't think you're reaching out too far there. Sex is categorical.
Categorical.
Name. I guess one could question whether name is a variable, but let's call that also categorical. Time.
One.
And then race. I already had race. All right. So you see, I'm making an outline. Let's turn this into a question. All right, and this requires some creativity. This is not computing, this is teaching. This is figuring out how you're going to get your students to think about things. maybe a good prompt would be, what are the quantitative variables in hill runners? Maybe we'll say, check all that apply. Right? And so here we have the answers. Year is, sex is not, name is not, time is, race is not. I'm just making an outline. And we could go on like this, but it would be very dull for you because you can see how to do this. What I want to do is show you how to introduce the interactivity into the document. First, let me compile this again, make sure I haven't broken anything. Oops, knit. While it's compiling there, it's going to show it. Look at the data. Here's my outline. I didn't format it right, but what are the quantitative variables? All right. Now, what I'd like to do is turn this into an interactive multiple choice question. Ready for that? Now, this is exactly the opposite of what we just did. When we invented this question, we were just thinking about teaching statistics. We weren't thinking about computing at all. And when we want to implement this as an interactive question, now we're just going to be thinking about computing and not about statistics. We already have what we want the question to be about. So we're just going to fill in the blanks so that this question becomes something that students can interact with. So now to talk about the process for doing that. I'm going to go back up to the top of the document. Remember at the very top between the 3 minus signs, the lines with the 3 minus signs, is the metadata for the document. I'm going to add a new line to this. And there's no reason you would anticipate what this line is going to be, but I happen to know what it needs to be to make this an interactive document. So the name of the field is called runtime, one word, and then the value is going to be shiny pre-rendered. Right? There's nothing at all obvious about that. And towards the end of the webinar, you'll see how to bring up the document template for an interactive document, and all this stuff will be there for you. Right? And now that I've done that, that was my mistake before, now I can add in the LearnR library. The LearnR library is like the many, many other libraries in R. It's R code, but it's what lets you create interactive documents, or it's one way to create interactive documents. And as after the tutorial, you're going to say, how did that work? So now I'm just gonna jump out. I'm gonna search on Google. I'm gonna search for LearnR tutorial. This is a tutorial for people writing them. And the second hit is the documentation for these tutorials. Now, the documentation often contains much more information than you're looking for, but if you want to look for it systematically, this is how to get there at rstudio.github.io/learnr. And what we're doing now, the multiple choice thing, is what they call a question. There are other kinds of interactive components, but it's what's called a question. And here they give you some examples of questions. So here, I'm going to copy out one of these. All right. Now, I hope we can keep this between you and me, but the way almost everyone programs computers is to copy from someone who already wrote the program and modify it just to make it do what you want, right? If you try to write these things from scratch, until you're pretty practiced, if you try to write them from scratch, it can be much harder. So this is what I always do. It's not plagiarism yet. I haven't published it, but I'm going to paste this right here above my outline. Okay, what kind of thing did I just paste in? What role does it play in the document?
I can answer that. I think it tells you how to make things say how make things show up in R and use R.
So this is again called a chunk, and the chunk is the component of a document that contains R code, and remember it's delimited by the 3 backticks and the R. And the one I copied, this is the name of the question, where am I? And this is another directive which says don't print out the R code. I'm going to get rid of that right now. And instead, I'm going to call this chunk variable types. Just to have a name for it, and every interactive component in a document needs to have a unique name. So I've just renamed the chunk, and that's not the question I want to ask. This is the question I want to ask. So I'm just going to paste it, and it goes in quotes. That's the first argument to the question function. So the way you create a question is, sensibly enough, with the question function, the first argument is the prompt for the question, and then here's the comma between arguments, and then you can see what follows. So what should our first answer be? Not planet Earth.
Year.
Year.
Correct, true still, or yes.
Yeah, it's still correct, true, good. And this one's going to be sex, and this one's going to be name, and that's not true. I'll leave that there for now, but that's the default. This one's going to be time. And I'll add a 5th one. What is it? Race. And that's not correct. And then this is a message to give if the student answers the question incorrectly. You could make it a hint. So I'm going to say, there is more than one quantitative variable in hill runners. Or maybe I'll say, check again. All right, and I have an extra parenthesis. That's what a multiple choice question looks like. Let's compile it and see what it looks like from the student's point of view. So here we are again. There's the code. Probably you don't want that to show up in the document you show to students. You might in certain circumstances, but sometimes it's nice to have right next, as you're developing the document, right next to the rendered question, which is much prettier. It's nice to have the code next to it so that if this is not really what you wanted, maybe that will give you some insight into what you need to change in the code. And this is now an interactive component. For example, I can check the sex button. That's the quantitative variable in hill runners. And the student or I submit the answer, and you see we get immediately some feedback about what was going on. And in fact, it's showing the 2 correct answers in this case. It's marking them with a check. So every multiple choice question will look more or less like this. You can make the contents of them as complex as you want. And not to say you're going to do this in statistics, but you can even include mathematical markup. I'm just going to make an integral. Not that we need that. dx dollar. Right? You can even include mathematical markup. Let's hope it works. Too clever I was. Right. So the answers can be anything you want. They can be a word, they can be a number, they can be a sentence, they can be a paragraph, whatever you want to ask. And in the multiple choice questions, there'll always be radio buttons. And I'm going to get rid of them. Yes.
Actually, then they're not radio buttons. They're check boxes in this case because we had multiple answers, right?
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yes.
If we only had one answer, then we would be able to check only one box at a time.
So I have a question for you. How do you make it to where it doesn't show them that their answers are the correct answers?
Okay, you don't want them to know whether they got the answer right?
No, I don't want them. I want them to be able to try it again. I want them to be told they're wrong and try again.
Okay, so this is one of the features of questions. So the things created by the question function. You saw incorrect and what role that plays. There are several other options that are described in the documentation. And now I'm trying to remember. Try again. No. Allow retry. All right, so maybe I'd rather have it work like this. I'd like to try it again. Let's just do year. That didn't work. Done. So every multiple choice question is going to be some variant of this one. Just the words inside the quotes need to change. And which one is correct and which one is not correct. So that's one of the basic interactive components of a tutorial. Right. Now, I'd like to, so I've done this part of the outline. Maybe we'd want to say what a case is and something like that, have multiple kinds of things. But now, Kate, you had a question earlier. Who ran the fastest? Okay.
Before we go on, somebody is saying they're getting an error in the question.
Okay. Well, let's deal with that during the clinic because we're almost done here.
Okay.
Let's deal with that during the clinic. And if we can see it, if you can share your screen when we do that, then it'll be much easier to track down what the problem might be. All right. But now we're going to just add in the other kind of component, which is a box for doing calculations. And you're going to be amazed by how simple this is. So it's a chunk, just like the question one was, and it has to have a unique name. And then it just needs to say exercise equals true. So before we had a question, this is an exercise, a different kind of thing. And now I'd better check I haven't broken it. All right, there's our multiple choice. Okay, so now we have a little block for code. Who ran the fastest? And we can enter our commands in here. So I think you don't want to start on day one asking students for the R commands to say who ran the fastest. But just to show you, here's an R command. I can't see my screen is blocked in part by the pictures. Here's an R command. I run code. It gives me the answer. Right? So let's dress this up a little bit as you might do it for students. And I'm going to set it up for you using the simple data wrangling commands that we had. So it's only take a minute. Hill runners goes to, what I'm going to do is filter out everyone whose time is the same as the maximum of the time. Oh no, fastest. Min, shouldn't it be?
Yes.
Okay. So if I make that the contents of this chunk, and as you'll see in a minute, start over. That pre-populates the exercise. And in this case, maybe it's enough just to ask the students to run the code, right? Just their first little introduction to a command. Who is the fastest? Ian Gilmore. He ran it in 258 seconds, right? But there's many other tricks that you could play with this. You know, you could say, think of the function, or you might say, what's the variable? Which would just be an exercise in getting the students to think about the names of the variables and what variable fastest might refer to. Right? So in my view, this is a perfectly sensible kind of exercise. Even though it's not a very hard one, it still gets you to think about it. If you can do it in a minute, then that's great too. So we might give instructions. Replace with the name of the variable needed to do the calculation. Done. Right. So that is the second kind of interactive component. And by and large, these documents consist of a mixture of the multiple choice kind of component and the code entry kind of component. And you can also do things like graphing and such from these code chunks. But there you've got the basic R code needed, first to create a chunk that's an exercise. The other kind, create a chunk, that's a question. And then this little bit of boilerplate to tell the document what it should be doing. And then this, so that it knows where the software for those code blocks and the questions are. So questions about that? And I think that's basically all we need to know at present about these tutorial documents.
So I'm not hearing any questions.
Well, so as always, what we do after these presentations is we finish up by going into a clinic where we can work with people one-on-one for as long as they want to stick around. We don't record the clinic, but we do have opportunities later on for people who couldn't participate in the live webinar to get help. So if you're one of the people in the future viewing this video and you would like to get help writing your own document, best time to do it is right now, now that you've seen how it works, then just write to us at StatPREP. Go to statprep.org. You can write to, say, your hub leader, which might be Ambika or Joe, if you're in LA or St. Paul, or write to me, Danny Kaplan, and we'll get you set up. All right, so thanks for participating. Kate, thanks for setting everything up. And I hope this has been useful.
I want to thank everyone for being here. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and we can go into the other part.